I'm a millionaire, and what happened to me that day still gives me chills. I saw a young woman tied to a bridge while piranhas churned in the water below. But before I tell you this story, I want to ask you something. When the video ends, leave a comment telling me what you thought of the story and give it a rating from 0 to 10. Also tell me what city you're watching from, because I genuinely want to get to know the people who follow my channel. And if you enjoy this kind of story, subscribe to the channel to support my work. It helps me a great deal to keep bringing stories like this one to you. Night in the deep Texas backcountry doesn't warn you when it comes. It just swallows everything whole. No streetlights, no lampposts, no comfort of knowing someone is nearby. I, Nathan Calloway, a 38-year-old businessman who built my fortune from nothing after a childhood marked by real poverty, was driving along a dirt road when my headlights lit up something my brain flat out refused to process. A woman, on a bridge, helpless, bound, leaning over dark water that churned slowly in tight spirals. Piranhas, dozens of them. The smell of mud and dry brush flooded the cab when I cracked the window. The only sounds were her muffled screams and the bubbling of the water down below. I slowed down. I stopped. I sat frozen for 20 seconds that felt like a lifetime, and then I drove away. I had just passed through Millbrook to close a land lease deal with Raymond Holt, a man in his early 50s who controlled half the rural business in the county with the cold detachment of someone moving pieces across a board without ever looking at the faces. I'd known Raymond for 3 years, a professional relationship, cold and calculated, where every word carried a price tag. The contract I'd signed that afternoon represented the biggest deal of my life. Heading back toward town, the document folded inside my navy sport coat pocket, I convinced myself that whatever was happening on that bridge wasn't my problem. But a conscience doesn't take bribes. About 1.5 miles from the bridge, I pulled over to the side of the road. Hands on the wheel, eyes shut. And inside my chest, something I recognized with a cold dread. The same emptiness I had felt decades earlier when, still young, I stood silent while my own mother was humiliated and left with nothing on the land where she lived, while nobody did a damn thing. I swore that day I would never again cross my arms in the face of injustice. And tonight I had. I turned around. Ashley was 29 years old with eyes that trusted nothing, and a life story that justified every last bit of that distrust. She worked as a freelance accountant and had stumbled onto a series of fraudulent records in Raymond Holt's books. Systematic embezzlement that was bleeding dozens of small tenant farmers dry, families paying for land that wasn't worth half of what they were being charged. She didn't go to the press. She didn't go to the sheriff's office. Ashley made the mistake of confronting Raymond directly, by email, demanding an explanation. 48 hours later, she was on that bridge in the middle of nowhere. When I came back and found her still in the same position, her first instinct was to scream louder. Not in relief, but in sheer terror. A man in a suit, expensive car, showing up in the dark? To her, that reeked of a second trap. She refused to stop screaming, backed up as far as the situation allowed, nearly losing her balance over the water. I had to get down on my knees on the rotting wood, hands raised, talking in a low voice for several minutes while my heart hammered, and the groaning of the bridge suggested it wouldn't hold both our weight much longer. I convinced her. I cut the ropes with the pocket knife I always carry, a gift from my father, the only thing the man left behind before he was gone too soon. And when Ashley finally stood on her own 2 feet, shaking, her ankles bruised purple and her bare feet caked in mud, she looked at me with a mix of gratitude and suspicion that would stay on her face for days. I drove Ashley to the nearest town and set her up in a room at a simple roadside motel. I didn't ask her name right away. I gave her water, food, and quiet. Only the next morning, after she'd slept with the desk chair wedged under the doorknob out of fear, did we actually talk. And that was when I heard the name. Raymond Holt. The same man. The contract in my coat pocket felt like it doubled in weight. Ashley showed me what she had. Screenshots, bank statements with inconsistencies, and a compressed file on a flash drive she had hidden before she was taken, tucked inside the insole of a shoe sitting in her apartment closet back in town. The problem, she couldn't go back to the apartment. Raymond had eyes everywhere. And I, who now knew too much, wasn't safe either. I canceled the contract. That decision cost me over $1 million in potential business, and it sent Raymond a signal, loud and clear, that I had switched sides. The first major setback came when I tried to reach out to Derek, my longtime business partner, to ask for some quiet logistical help. Derek listened to everything in silence, said he needed to think it over. And that same night, without my knowing, he called Raymond. A 15-year friendship weighed less than the $200,000 offered in exchange for our location. I found out about the betrayal the hard way. When I showed up at the meeting point I'd arranged with Derek to pick up documents, two of Raymond's men were there waiting instead. I slipped out through the back entrance of a bar, tearing up my knee on a rusted iron gate, and sprinted through the maze of back alleys in the old part of San Marcos until I lost the two of them in a narrow lane packed with local craft stalls. The smell of tanned leather and fired clay from the goods on display burned itself into my memory as the smell of the moment I understood I was truly on my own. Ashley, hiding at the motel, waited hours without a word from me. When I finally got back with my knee wrapped in a makeshift rag, she didn't say anything. She just looked at me with those eyes that trusted nothing. And for the first time, the distrust wasn't there. Curtis, a former employee of Raymond's who had been let go without receiving everything he was owed, crossed my path by chance in a bank line. We recognized each other from an old meeting. Curtis knew more than we expected. He had held on to physical documents as personal insurance, afraid that Raymond might one day try to pin something on him. They were the missing pieces to complete Ashley's puzzle. But Curtis was scared. Deeply scared. His family lived in the area. His wife Sandra worked at a public elementary school whose funding indirectly depended on Raymond's political pull. Convincing him to cooperate took me 3 days of conversations, patience, and a brutally honest accounting of the real risks every one of us was facing. Ashley took part in those conversations carefully, but it was she who finally hit the right nerve. She showed Curtis the statements proving that the defrauded tenant farmers included his own brother-in-law. Curtis agreed. He handed over the physical documents, and the next day, while he and his family were out, his house was broken into. Nothing was taken. Drawers were pulled open, closets ransacked, everything turned upside down. A message without words. Things escalated when Raymond, realizing the documents were making the rounds, decided to change his approach. He stopped chasing us and started undermining us. Through Marcus, his communications advisor and local influence operator, he spread word around town that I was in serious financial trouble and that Ashley was a disgruntled former employee who had been fired for dishonesty and was out for revenge. The rumor spread fast in a small town. Claire, a local journalist who had initially shown interest in digging into the story, backed off out of fear of lawsuits. Diane, a lawyer I had reached out to, canceled our meeting without explanation. I felt the ground give out from under me. 3 weeks ago, I was a respected man. Now I was a name people stepped around. Ashley, when she found out about the rumors being spread about her, went quiet for 2 days. A thick silence I learned to respect. When she came out of it, her eyes held something different from the paranoia of before. It was resolve. The turning point came from the last place we expected, Valerie, a distant cousin of Ashley's who worked as an administrative assistant at the county office, came across a land inspection report among routine paperwork that had been improperly filed away. A document that cross-referenced with Ashley's statements and Curtis's papers formed a chain of evidence impossible to dismiss. Valerie was no hero. She was a 44-year-old woman with bills to pay and a young kid at home, and it took her 2 days to decide to do what was right. When she did, the body of evidence finally had what it needed: consistency, documentation, and an independent source. I reached out to an investigative journalism outlet in Austin. Not Claire, who had backed down, but a seasoned reporter named Margaret, known for not bending under pressure. Margaret spent 36 hours going through the material without sleeping, and then she said she would publish. Raymond knew what was coming. He tried one last move. He offered me a private way out: money, cancellation of my losses on the contract, and silence from everyone. I listened to the offer over the phone while Ashley sat right beside me, not making a sound. After a long silence, I answered with 2 words and hung up. The story broke on a Friday evening. It wasn't just an article. It was a multimedia special with scanned documents and audio testimony from Curtis and other tenant farmers who, emboldened, had come forward in the 48 hours before publication. Earl, a small-scale rancher who had lost land in Raymond's scheme, gave the most powerful testimony. A man of 60, voice unsteady, describing what he had lost as the inheritance he was supposed to leave his son. In less than 12 hours, Raymond Holt's name was the most talked about in the state on social media. On the very same platforms where he had cultivated an image of a rural philanthropist, photos with schoolchildren from small towns, speeches about regional development, the public was now sharing the documents with a ferocity that no PR man could contain. The humiliation didn't come from a courtroom. It came from every single person who shared, commented, recognized the name, and said, "I always knew something was off." Raymond withdrew from public life, but he left behind enough of a paper trail for the administrative proceedings to follow their course. The full collapse wouldn't come overnight. It would be slow, documented, and inevitable. Ashley and I were sitting in a simple diner in San Marcos when the story went live. No toast, no dramatic embrace. I drank a cup of coffee. She ate her first biscuit with a real appetite in 3 weeks. Outside, the hill country was going dark the way it always does out in the back country. Suddenly, completely, without warning. But this time there was a light on in the window. The bridge at the end of nowhere was still there. Rotting, creaking, forgotten. But we had already crossed it. In the months that followed, Ashley and I became partners. Not only in the legal proceedings that were still grinding forward, but in something larger. A consulting practice focused on small, rural tenant farmers across Texas, so that no other Sandra would have to fear for her child's school, and no other Earl would lose what he had to pass on. I learned something on that bridge that no million-dollar deal ever taught me. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to turn back when going forward would have been so much easier. That justice isn't always fast, but when it's built with the right hands, it holds. And that some bridges, no matter how rotten they look, have to be crossed. Because on the other side there is someone waiting. And that someone can change everything. Today, when I drive through Millbrook, I no longer look away from the dirt roads. I watch every bridge, every shadow, every place where someone might be in trouble. Because I learned that the difference between being complicit and being human comes down to a single choice. The choice to turn around. And I did. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life a little better. Leave a comment telling me what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you so much.